Hi. I decided to write down my opening remarks because I feel more comfortable reading them since they're a little more coherent perhaps this way. So forgive me for looking at my paper here, but I just want to welcome everybody. And I want to say that I'm Miriam Victory Spiegel, your host for this evening's National Salon of Democrats Abroad, Switzerland. My Swiss and German friends and family call me Miriam. My American friends call me by my nickname, Vicky, which is what Liz just did and what a few other people here have done. The middle name, Victory, was given to me by my parents who had recently escaped from Nazi Germany and who were celebrating my birth the day before the Nazi capitulation in May 1945. So now everybody can figure out how old I am. But that isn't why I said it. I wanted to explain why my name is Victory and that I was born and grew up in New York, where I still vote. I have lived in German-speaking Europe for over 40 years, more than half of my life. I came to live in Zurich in 1983 and have thrived here. I became an active member of Democrats Abroad only after Donald Trump was elected president, and when it suddenly seemed of existential importance to me to elect Democratic candidates. This is an especially challenging time for those of us who care about democracy and democratic values, both upper and lowercase. In recent years, issues that I have demonstrated for and supported all of my adult life seem to be becoming a national reality. Movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, reproductive and voting rights were gaining national traction when suddenly something shifted like the ground beneath my feet. The backlash has been vehement and painful to watch and experience. My professional life as a couples and family therapist is spent trying to help people to connect or reconnect to the people they care most about, because the experience of not being heard or accepted is of existential importance to them. I help people to engage in and practice dialogue, something I truly believe in. Communicating at eye level with others with respect and humility. Words like evil, wrong and right, hatred, and contempt have no place generally in my vocabulary. At the moment, however, I'm having a hard time outside of my professional setting to practice dialogue. People invading the Capitol in an attempt to disrupt a legal election, people disrupting school board meetings in the US because they want to suppress the discussion of slavery and civil rights, people here in Switzerland who refuse to get vaccinated against COVID, are not people I want to engage in dialogue with. Their arguments don't interest me. I think of them as wrong-headed, stupid, intransigent, as my enemies. So I am facing an inner dilemma. I find myself othering people when I know only too well that othering doesn't have a good outcome. It needs to be ended peacefully. But how? And how can we find new ways of upholding and restoring democratic values and human rights? I recently attended an international conference where the keynote speaker was Reverend Nontombi Naomi Tutu. She spoke about her experience with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which she described as a flawed but important attempt to end the crimes and wounds of apartheid in her country. To achieve individual and communal healing, she introduced her listeners to the concept of Ubuntu, the capacity to find common humanity. I Googled Ubuntu and learned Ubuntu is a Nguni Bantu term meaning humanity. It is sometimes translated
Ich kann
as,
dich jetzt nicht reden. Ich rufe dich an in 5 Minuten, ja?
it is sometimes translated as,
Okay, cool. Okay.
Can everybody mute themselves, please? Because anyway, Ubuntu is sometimes translated as, I am because we are. Also, I am because you are, or humanity towards others. The South African Journal of Social Work defines Ubuntu as, quote, a collection of values and practices that people of Africa or of African origin view as making people authentic human beings. While the nuances of these values and practices vary across different ethnic groups, they all point to one thing: an authentic, individual human being is part of a larger and more significant relational, communal, societal, environmental, and spiritual world, unquote. So for today's monthly National Salon of Democrats Abroad, Switzerland, I've invited someone who has devoted his professional and personal life to building and sustaining democracy in the United States. Our speaker is distinguished Professor Charles Heckscher, Director of the Center for the Study of Collaboration in Work and Society at Rutgers University in New Jersey. At the center, he is currently leading 2 research projects, one on the development of public conversation and a second on the effects of teamwork in healthcare. His research focuses on organization change and its consequences for employees and unions, on the possibilities for more collaborative and democratic forms of work, and on the challenge of rebuilding trust in societal institutions. Charles has been an active participant and observer of the group Braver Angels in the US for several years now, a group that seems to be engaging in Ubuntu, even if they don't call it that. I've invited him to tell us about the organization and his ideas about its work. After he speaks, there will be an opportunity for Q&A, followed by discussions both in small groups and all of us together. With that as my introduction, I turn the Zoom microphone to my friend and this evening's speaker, Charles Heckscher. Thank you.
You're muted, Charles.
Yeah, let me put up some slides. Thank you, Vicki. I guess that was muted. I already thanked you, but I'll do it again. It's a pleasure in a way to talk to a group of Democrats. I don't do that a lot these days. I talk to groups that are quite mixed politically or divided politically, trying to bridge the divide. So, but they're usually quite united geographically. So this is a very different kind of group, very divided geographically, but united politically. So I have to reframe in some ways what I want to say. I don't have it written down like Vicki, but I did pull together a couple of slides. And I'd like to start with a little bit of philosophy of why I do this, and then get into what it is that I've been doing, for discussion. So, why bridging the divide? I mean, it's actually, as Vicki was talking, I was thinking of one thing that impressed me a lot. About 15 years ago, I went to a church service led by Bishop Tutu. So it's very related to what you were talking about here in Trenton, New Jersey. And his theme was everybody stands in God's light. And it was an impressive thing. There was this moment where he said, everybody stands in God's light. Idi Amin, can you deal with that? Adolf Hitler, George Bush, and everybody laughed a little bit at that nervously. And then that was the theme, that, that no matter how much you disagree, no matter how much, and you fight for the right and so on, that you have to fundamentally accept that. And I think, that's something that I deeply believe myself, and certainly animates a lot of the work that I've been doing. Let's see if I can get this to work here. Yes, so I would start with what seems to me, speaking to a group of Democrats, with what is maybe the core thing that defines me, at least to myself, as a Democrat, as a person of the left, which is that we're aiming to build more inclusive communities. Inclusive both of diversity and of scope and scale, ultimately global. And that we really need to do that in order to deal with the complexities of our world. But that presents, and Vicki was actually talking about some of these problems, a set of real tensions and problems. So one of them is, there's lots of evidence, lots of experience, but also, research, that when you build diversity, you reduce trust. That the act of increasing the diversity in a group, including new people, undermines the trust on which that group is built. Now, that may not be a long-term effect. There may be ways of getting through it, and that's what I hope. That's what I'm working on. But that's always the immediate effect, and there's this tension. So essential, I think this is the essential difference. The people more on the right tend to say, let's solidify our community as it is, around the values and traditions and so on that we know. That's what conservation is. And liberals tend to say, let's reach out, bring in new people. I actually think you kind of have to do both, or in some kind of dialectic, but there's this basic tension. And it's also related to a different tension, which Vicky was also talking about it, which is, we want to include, but we also want to win, right? That there's this kind of sense of really an ultimate world-defining battle that we're engaged in, good and evil in some respects. But if you're going to do that, that means you're excluding a lot of people, right? If you're going to win, if you're going to orient to winning, just to winning elections and so on, and then putting into place what you believe, if you can win them, then you're excluding half the country, more or less. So you're, the farmer who, as we drive through New Jersey, we see a lot of these people, struggling to save their farm and, working very long hours for very little reward, who votes for Trump, you exclude him or her. The mother, you drive through Pennsylvania and you see people in the diners and so on, have a couple of kids. These are memories that I have. A couple of kids who have died of opioid addiction. You want to exclude them. They're Trump supporters, right? So if you're going to win, you got to exclude those people. But there's a tension there because we don't want to do that, right? How do you overcome that? So I believe that. I wrote a little essay called "Can Love Win?" Where it's sort of around this theme, and I think ultimately only love can win. That is, if you proceed by getting 51% of the vote, or winning a battle and imposing your views, you haven't won because the losers will nurse a grievance almost forever. Right? They'll be back at you. That the only way to win and to progress, for our values to succeed, is to include people who we really disagree with, and not to do the demonizing, stereotyping that we do so often. And if we fall into this too much, there are times, I think, when you have to win. When there's a crisis, you just got to do it, right? There are moments, but I think whenever we make that choice, we have to do it in the full awareness of the dangers of doing it. And they are very serious dangers. And the big danger is, polarization is a way of putting it. That we are falling rapidly. In fact, we're already pretty deep into it. A vicious circle of mistrust in which every action that one side takes only increases the mistrust of the other side. And we only increases the divide, only increases the stereotyping, and that leads to a conflict and a paralysis. We can't do what we want, right? They can't do what they want, but there's stuff we got to, we believe is incredibly important, like climate change and other issues. Now COVID, and we can't get there because we have, so many of the countries dug in against us, and we haven't reached out. So, that's I think this is a major danger. And I think historically, if you look at these vicious circles of mistrust in societies, they don't end well. So that's what I'm trying to avoid. So I've been doing a lot of my work through this group called Braver Angels. Actually, in the US now, there's a large spectrum of organizations trying to bridge this divide. Doesn't mean trying to bring in every, 100% of the population, but you want to try to reach out to most of them. And it turns out that there is actually a lot of agreement across a lot of people, much wider than the political parties. And there are literally hundreds of organizations working in that space, trying to get people to talk to each other in various contexts, trying to build agreements to make nonpartisan proposals and so on and so forth. But of those organizations, I've talked with quite a few of them. I have a sense of the lay of the land. I think Braver Angels is one of the best. and for a particular reason, which is that it is the only one that has a field organization, that has people throughout the country working in chapters and working on this problem and their local level, and then getting up to the national level. The others are all sort of intellectuals and, you know, fragments and so on, mostly of intellectuals around the country. So Braver Angels has 75, we call them alliances, but they're chapters, 75 alliances now in all but one state. There are over 1,000 people who have been received training as moderators of bipartisan discussions, of debates, you know, the kind of debate we have, as coordinators and other functions. Well over 1,000 people like that. These are volunteers. The organization is getting some traction now in raising some money. So we have now, I don't know, about 8 or 10 paid staff at the national level and 3 or 4 at the field level, helping to organize these field operations. I think this is where the action is going to happen. That all these organizations that are sort of holding big press conferences and having panels and, you know, writing articles, is just not going to do it. I mean, it's not a bad thing to do, but it's in the field that we're going to make a difference. So what these chapters do is they hold various kinds of events. We have offerings that are quite well organized, and, you know, the materials are developed. A set of workshops, which were the core of this organization from the beginning, of bringing Reds and Blues together to understand each other better, to overcome the stereotypes, to see each other, you know, as more than just stereotypes. You know, there's one exercise where the Reds and the Blues separate, and they each talk about how do we think the other group sees us, right? And what's the kernel of truth in that? You know, what do we think is really the situation, but what's the kernel of truth in that? And then that discussion becomes one in which they find that there's actually a lot more, you know, room for discussion than anybody expected. They hold debates, very, you know, structured debates in which the issues are explored across the divide, and then try to get some stuff done. We're really just making progress. I've been doing it now for a year and a half, and the organization now has just launched this initiative called Braver Politics. To, by the way, it used to be called Better Angels, but it turned out that somebody else had the copyright to that name, so we changed it to Braver Angels, which is why we're that. But we've launched this thing called Braver Politics, which is an attempt to have some impact on the political sphere. So that's where my passion personally is, where I'm focusing this practical work. I'm also, you know, doing various other projects. So I've been developing these town halls. So I feel that our democracy is not up to the task of dealing with the complexity of modern challenges. That the institutions have been eroded to a degree that they can't deal with them. So, for example, 50 years ago, there would have been, and there was here in Princeton, I'm in Princeton, New Jersey, there was, you know, a Democratic and a Republican, you know, shop front in town. People would drift in and out. They'd see each other on the street going in and out. You know, there was this kind of mixing. You knew who people talked in that context, and it was very local. Those are gone. They don't exist anywhere really in the US that I know of. Even in small towns, you don't have those local organizations. Elected officials have stopped doing town halls. They're not talking to their constituents. Very few of them are doing that now because it's become such an unpleasant business. And, you know, what they're doing is too complex, and also they've got this divided constituency that comes in to yell at. So a lot of the institutions of democracy that enable people to talk to each other, to sort of exchange views, and to build some trust with their elected officials, have broken down. So that's the point of these town halls, is to try to overcome that. So we've designed a model of how do you hold a town hall in a way that is constructive, that people talk to people that they don't normally talk to, right? that they engage in looking for what are the elements of common ground, that they talk to their representatives to try to build greater understanding and unity. So these town halls are intended to have a very wide scale. We've only done 4 real, we've done 8 of them so far, 4 sort of real ones, state, local, 3 at the state level, 1 at the local level, got a bunch more scheduled. And this next year, it's supposed to be a year where they will really roll out. But they're intended to be, the vision is one where citizens at all levels would engage in pretty frequent deliberation. You'd go to 1 or 2 of these town halls every year on a difficult issue, right? So they'd be talking to people that they don't normally talk to. And they'd be talking to their representatives in a way which they don't normally talk to. Easy to do, right? And widely scaled. And then through those mechanisms to begin to change what you might call the ordinary conversation, political conversations that people have. So instead of ordinary conversation being just sitting around the kitchen table and saying, did you see what those people did yesterday again? Kind of demonizing and stereotyping. You'd have conversations where people would say, I had this really, I was at this town hall yesterday, or this event, and I heard some things I hadn't thought of. What do you think of that? And sort of open up what happens around kitchen tables in neighborhoods, around water coolers and so on around the country. That's the vision. So here's how it works. Again, the idea being scalable, simple, and flexible, adaptable to many situations. It's a 2-hour event. The first hour are citizens talking to each other. So they meet in small groups. No matter how big the group or the event is, it could be several hundred. We've been up to 50. Most of the events have been around 50 so far, but we hope to get up to several hundred. But they break into small groups of 4 or 5 people, and they talk about an issue, and they seek common ground on that issue. Essentially, they're mixed groups, actually randomly assigned groups, and they try to agree on what we as an entire group want to say to our representative. So if there are disagreements within the group, which there usually are, they look at them, but they put them aside. What we're really looking for is what can we agree on that we want to say, right? And so there's a kind of, identifying of differences, identifying of similarities. There's always, we've done one on electoral reform, we've done one on homelessness, we've done one on police reform, some controversial issues. Always, there is a lot more agreement than people expected. There's a lot more room for discussion and common ground. There are the ideologues who have staked out simple claims. They get drawn in pretty effectively to this discussion. But most people aren't ideologues, and they have no kind of, well, I can see that, and you come to a lot of common ground. So that's the first hour. Second hour is actually then presenting that and having some interaction with the political representatives, usually elected. In one case, it was a county commissioner, which is not an elected position. But these groups present their the outputs of their discussion, and then there's some interaction and discussion with the representative. So it's trying to build trust and understanding among citizens and with their representatives. So, the idea of it is it's resource light, doesn't require highly skilled moderators or consultants or anything like that, right? It can be done, very simply with just a couple of moderators for the whole thing, and not highly trained. It's inexpensive. It's done virtually. Mostly we've done it in person also. It can encompass large groups and have people deliberating, actually, not just sitting and listening, right? And it encourages actual constructive discussion. And what we found so far is that that's worked pretty well. That is, in the assessments, the discussions have all been quite good, and the political attendees have liked them a lot. Some of them have already come back for a second round. The participants, the citizens, have also liked the experience and feel they've gained some understanding. They feel they've changed their views some, usually, gotten a more complex view of the issue. these are just from, it's the sort of surveys or evaluations we do afterwards, as well as conversations with people. They have a lot more trust in their representatives because they see the representative is trying generally to trying to do the right thing and struggling with a complex issue and so on and so forth. And in a way, the best indicator people say they're really ready to do it again. They want to come to more such events. And that's what I think is essential for eventually building the momentum. So I just want to end in a way this piece, and we can do question and answer and all that. I just want to sort of lay out the basic picture. But with the big challenge, here's the really big challenge, and I don't know the answer, and that's getting a broader recruitment. Braver Angels, like every other organization of its kind, is very homogeneous. It's incredibly highly educated. Our members, I believe, I should have looked this up. I think it's 85% have college degrees, and 2/3 have graduate training, which is just completely out of the line with the rest of the country, right? And it's also pretty heavily white, quite heavily white. It's 90% white, and heavily urban. So, and older too. Now, that's not surprising, but it doesn't work for the purposes that that we're discussing here, right? That we have to be able to reach out and engage parts of the population who are deeply disaffected with a political environment. I think I imagine it could be done by reaching out by picking the right issues the people are passionate about, reaching out through churches and so on. I would like to do one of these town halls for school boards, for example, which are currently in this country having a terrible time. They're again starting to shut down school board meetings because they have people coming and yelling at them both about the vaccines and about teaching of race in schools, critical race theory. They've become very destructive kinds of meetings. To use this method again, which seems to be pretty robust against that kind of polarization, to make school boards a real engine of democracy in education, which at this point, they're really not. So, I think in the end, we have a real problem. It's easier to get people excited, involved, and enthusiastic about winning, right? If you can demonize the other side, this is one of our dilemmas. If you can demonize the other side, talk about how terrible they are, develop a sense of moral righteousness, and that the other side is morally unrighteous, you can get a lot of energy. And again, there's lots of evidence of this. So our question has to be, in some ways, can we build enthusiasm for actual inclusion, which is really what I think we all care about as Democrats, as people of the left. Can you get energy and enthusiasm for that? Can you frame it in some way that draws people, larger numbers of people and less educated people into campaigns for broadening inclusion? That's our goal here. It's a long way to go. So those are my thoughts.
Wow, Charles, thank you so much. You presented it so clearly and so thoughtfully, and I really appreciate that. And I want to thank you for myself, but also on behalf of the group. Maybe we can put the slides away for the moment.
Just doing that. Yep. Okay.
Great, thank you. And I thought of a few questions that I myself would like to ask, but I would like to also give people an opportunity to indicate whether they have questions for you as well, or reactions to what you've been saying. I was very, what struck me at your very beginning was that there's this desire for both inclusion and community that people like us probably feel very strongly. And the question is, how can you also find community, as I think we have in Democrats Abroad, because we are relatively like-minded. We also work on issues of inclusion, which we care deeply about. but we also want to win. Because it's, as I was saying before, there are certain things that are just so existential for so many of us, that winning isn't just about winning, but it's about really protecting the values that we have, and the idea of sustaining community that would be inclusive. So I bring that up because I thought you framed the tension very well, and what I think you're saying, at least in part, is that what we need to think about or rethink about is how you can reach people in an inclusionary way, maybe at a more local level. The people particularly who are so mesmerized either by social media or by the national cable news media, and are held in thrall by these various media forms. And I just wonder if you can say something about your idea about going local, as I think that was really your argument, your suggestion, your proposal to go local, to have people included in conversations. Is it possible to have this kind of activity on a national level as well? Do you see any potential for the media that I referred to using this approach as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think eventually, it's really tough that there have been lots of people trying. There are various organizations that are, rating or trying to issue guidelines for the media or for civics education, which I think is another big area that needs to be have attention paid to it. And they haven't had much impact. We had, one group called the National Institute for Civil Discourse. I was really struck by this, which is a very effective group. It's been around for a long time and has held some very important events. But they tried to put together a lot of events with many of the groups and itself around the infrastructure bill. And, people held discussions and so on. And then they made a presentation on the Hill in the halls of Congress. They made a presentation, and about, I don't know, one congressman came to it, and maybe a couple of staffers, and they've been trying to get an op-ed placed, and they're very frustrated because they're saying, nobody wants to hear this message of working together, but what they want to hear is how how is one side or the other going to win? And we're not getting that message across. So I think that's really hard. And I think the only thing that will, I do think it has to start from the grassroots, that when people start having this experience, if we can get it out there broadly enough, and again, not just among people who have college degrees, but if we can get it out there broadly enough, that actually this is a constructive experience and that we enjoyed it, the reactions that people have had in these town halls, then I think the media will start paying attention. And then that's not what they're getting. That's not what they're hearing now.
And are you ready for another question? Because I have one more question that I'd like to ask, and then I know that we have two people who have raised their hands. I wanted to ask you if the people that have been invited to these town hall meetings are all through the network of Braver Angels, or have they been invited through other channels as well? How does the invitation work?
There have been some broadcast messages, through the local newspaper and that kind of thing, but we have not been effective yet. This is certainly a thing I want to try to get going at connecting to organizations that other kinds of people are part of, like gun clubs, for example. I think we should, have a debate on, or have a town hall around gun legislation, and make sure that we talk to gun clubs and get, them to send people, because those are people who are passionate about it, thought about it, and are very different from our current members on the whole. Even the Reds in our organization, many of them may have guns, but they're not passionate gun people. That's not their thing. They're college graduates. They're very. I think we. Just to return to an earlier thing you said, Vicky, the reason that I think people are enthralled by social media and so on, that speaks to them. They're hearing people who are actually reflecting their concerns in a way that the New York Times does not. And for that matter, neither do probably anybody in this room, at least the ones I know, which are a couple of you. That is, there, you keep hearing that theme, Trump sees us. Now, we can dispute whether it's true, but that's what they feel. They really feel it. And we don't. We come in talking about stuff. It doesn't get them where they live. So, so it's really changing. We've got to connect to those people directly, and we have been very bad at a local level. I mean, the Republicans have taken over the states, a lot of the states. I mean, they've got, I forget, maybe 25 states in which they have both branches and the governorship, something like that, and several others where they're fairly dominant. They've been working at the local level in a way that the Democrats have not. So I'm very, I think this strategy is about bridging, but it's also about connecting the values we have to people that we don't normally connect to.
Mhm. Great, thank you. So I think the first person who wanted to ask a question is also, just to introduce them to you, is the chair of the Global Black Caucus of Democrats Abroad. So,
No, the first one.
Oh,
The
it's
first
Evelyn.
person who wanted to
Evelyn's
talk was-
first,
well,
yeah.
that's the first one I saw. So let me just, if I can pass the baton on to Lee or Jazz, as they're known to us.
No, Vicky, Evelyn was before me. So
But
please
I-
give her my spot.
Well, I didn't see her before you, so,
Yeah. Go ahead, Evelyn.
So-
quickly.
okay.
Okay, thank you, Jazz. Yeah, I asked way before Jazz. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how this works. I've been following Braver Angels for a very long time, and I've heard very good things about your trainings. But you said, for example, in the assessment that this is very constructive. There's no blow up. Can you explain why there are no blow-ups? Is this because of the highly educated older white people that come, or is there something else that makes this constructive? I'm very surprised. I have a lot of experience with group dynamics, and I'm a mediator myself, and I've done empathy circles, for example. So I'm trying to understand what is the method that makes this constructive?
Well, so there are a lot of different kind of events. Evelyn, this is it's a very good question. I think it probably does. I mean, you've got a self-selected group at this point, so we're going to have to see over time how robust it is as it spreads to wider. If we succeed in spreading it to a much wider audience, but I think the methods are actually quite effective. So the red-blue workshops, which are around understanding, really ask people for their experiences, to share where they're coming from, and to listen to where others are coming from, and builds on the sort of surprise that people feel that the others are actually human beings like them, which is sort of an inevitable thing that happens when you start to do that. So, there's a stereotyping exercise, there's a fishbowl exercise, there are these kinds of things which I'm sure you're familiar with, very well structured, able to be done. That workshop has been done now thousands of times in many different contexts, hasn't blown up yet, but to my knowledge. And it's done often led by moderators who are not highly trained. They go through a training, mostly online these days, but they're not people who have a long career of working on this stuff. So that's good. I think that worked. Let me say about the town hall. The reason I think it has worked so far, and I think it may work in the future, is that we create these cells, as it were, which so in other words, in the first hour, we break people into groups of 4 or 5. And the task of those groups is to find common ground. If one of those groups has an ideologue or a screamer or somebody who doesn't want to participate in that way, the group can call in one of the leaders of the session to either eject them or talk to them or whatever mechanism. We actually haven't had that happen yet. We've had some real ideologues around police reform, especially and around the homelessness issue. We've had some real ideologues in these sessions, but they have gotten into the spirit of seeing how can we actually find some common ground. So that's worked. But if it didn't, when you get to the second hour, you just wouldn't call on that group, right? So in a way, we kind of potentially seal that off. So instead of somebody coming to the microphone and talking to the entire room, which is the usual structure of these events, right? And then somebody else getting all worked up and coming to the other microphone and yelling back. We have a structure in which people who are talking about common ground talk about common ground, and we can control that well enough without controlling the actual participants. We don't screen the participants.
Okay.
So I think that'll work.
Okay, that's I think it's almost like the dialogue history. Through the group structure, you create a kind of a room.
Yeah.
So people are interested in common ground.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting more of an idea. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and we also have this fail-safe, and we do that, and then there's this fail-safe where if it doesn't work, we can control it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it also, the group size makes a difference. And like you said, not somebody standing in the front and talking.
Right.
And that's, and that's why you sit in a circle, for example, all these different things that help people focus on a common ground. Thank you very much. Okay.
And my apologies, Evelyn. I really didn't see that, that you had been the first one in line.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
is Jazz the next person?
Yes, thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Charles, for your great presentation today about Braver Angels. I'm just going through what I heard from your presentation as well, and I'm a little bit shocked as well to hear that about 80% of those people are older white male, just with a higher educational background. So that leaves a lot of space for real inclusion, real diversity, real equity, and also for real accessibility. So what measures are you taking in your organizations to actually really implement what you're trying to preach? This is kind of a critical question. I'm not trying to attack you, but I'm just trying to get a clear picture of everything. Are you working with key stakeholders from African American population, from the Latinx populations? Because from where we come as African American people, a lot of the older white male, highly educated people, they think they are so sophisticated and they know everything about DAI and accessibility, but at the end of the day, they're actually really the ones that lack it the most. I have a follow-up question with that too, but
I completely agree. That's why I brought it up at the end. This is a real problem. And we are trying, we're taking some steps, but I wouldn't say that we know how they're going to work. So those steps are, we have internally a People of Color caucus that meets frequently to, try to figure this out better. And we have several initiatives for reaching out to community groups. The People of Color are doing that. We have a Working People's Caucus as well, which is looking for more for working class, sort of a class-based thought. And they're reaching out to organizations of their type. So actually one of our, most effective leaders at this point is a Black pastor from Kentucky, I believe it is, who's leading a lot of this political stuff. And he's being very effective at reaching, his congregation is Black, but he's been very effective reaching out to other Black organizations. So we have a whole faith-based organizations initiative to try, which also helps bring in people who are not normally in our mix. I think we're making very slow progress. A lot of this is quite new. It's absolutely essential. If it doesn't take off, I don't think anything we are doing will be effective. So I am passionate about that. But that's the basic strategy, is to reach out to the organizations where people are and see if we can get them involved.
Yeah, because that also, when we're also speaking about common grounds and so on, I think putting that in brackets would be a little bit more a sensible way of forming it, because I surely could imagine that if I'm in a full room with people, let's say 1,000 people, of which 80% are what we just heard, and the others are that, I don't really think that the topics are going to be really equal on that. So I think that is something that probably your organization is working with. But my follow-up question that I have there is, how can we from Democrats Abroad, or even from the Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus, collaborate with Braver Angels, maybe in a statewide way, national way, or even in a global sense? How could we maybe work together to encourage and empower more diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within Braver Angels? Because if we all work together, there's one goal.
Right. Well, so I mean, certainly in terms of the U.S. level thing, I could put you in touch with some people. We would love any help we can get on the problems you're raising. And if you've got did Vicky say that you have a caucus or a sub-organization within Democrats Abroad?
I'm the chair of the Global Black Caucus from Democrats Abroad,
Right.
yes.
Okay. So yes, I mean, that so for that connection, I know who in Braver Angels I would put you in touch with to try to talk through how you could help. So that would be one thing. And if we could find a way, either we're doing things at local, state, and national levels roughly. So any of those levels, kinds of organizations that would be interested in participating. I just think it's essential, and I think there's a broad feeling that it's essential to reach out. We're also doing a little bit. It's this kind of the leading edge of our efforts of what we call action groups, which are groups that sort of come together, again, multi-stakeholder kind of groups, to actually do something, usually in their community. So the homelessness discussion has led to really an initiative to try to improve the conditions for the homeless, but it's across the political spectrum and across, and it includes some homeless people in it. So we're doing some of that kind of stuff, and I would like to, create that possibility more broadly. When you talk globally, we have not done that at all. Now, I think this problem of polarization, as I think you all know, is not just a US problem. Right? It's not just in America. It's happening kind of everywhere. So I don't quite know how to approach that, or how, I don't even know. I know quite a lot about the movement in the US. I don't know how much of this kind of thing is happening abroad, who we could connect to. There's nobody in our organization that's really thinking of it. But I would certainly be interested in talking about it and seeing if there are ways of opening it up on a global level, because things like climate change, or COVID for that matter, we're not going to solve in one country. So we do have to extend this.
Thank you very much.
No.
I see Sharon's hand is up, and then Antonine's.
Thank you. Charles, nice to meet you. I've enjoyed your discussion. I'm in the Chicago area with a nonprofit called Together's Better Alliance, and we focus on efforts to dismantle systemic racism through education. And a member of our organization has attended at least a few of your Braver Angels meetings, but we have not honestly spoken about thoughts or reactions to the experience. But just listening to you speaking about the demographics, I'm curious about your internal and people of color caucus and the working people caucuses. Are they diverse? And if they are, can you speak about any feedback you get from them regarding possible needed improvements on driving change, whether it's diversity or, and I'm also questioning, when you have the demographics that you have and reaching consensus on topics, have you ever had people of color participate and then not come back? I'm just trying to get some sense of how relatable the group is for those who are not represented, who are different from the majority of your members.
I'm sure we have had some participate not come back, but we have some very dedicated members who are people of color, or I don't think we have actually caucuses around LGBTQ issues and so on, but I imagine we probably have quite a lot of diversity on that dimension. But in terms of race, obviously the people of color caucus is diverse on a racial dimension. I mean, it's mainly people of color, but it engages the organization from that perspective. There are a lot of chapters or alliances right now that are interested in holding events around the issue of race and education. So I think is exactly the issue you were talking about. Because that's, as you know, just an incredible flashpoint right now, and the Republicans are making hay out of it, right? Because they are, I certainly believe, but that they are exaggerating and stereotyping a few events that have happened that are probably questionable. Anyway, they're certainly blowing it up. But it's right now it's working for the Republicans. I think there's really no question. The major Democratic pollsters are really concerned about this. So how to make it work for the Democrats and for a real advance in the values which we hold is a big question. And I again think it's only by actually engaging people. I think if we're going to try to hold some town halls on this issue. I believe that if you engage the angry Republican parents, most of them, in a real discussion on this, they would agree for the most part. Certainly the ones I've talked to would agree for the most part. You have to have a lot more discussion of slavery than we do now. You have to, these issues have to be these issues of racial injustice have to be raised in their profile. They may disagree how much and so on, or exactly how, but there's lots of room for discussion. But when it gets polarized, it becomes something that is going to lead to, it is leading to legislation which shuts it down, makes it harder to talk about the issue, and pushes us backwards. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, I think we're really feeling our way.
Yeah, because I think one of the challenges here in the States is depending upon what your polarized views are or whatever party you're affiliated with, you tend to listen to one news organization versus another,
Right.
and trying to find common ground when you were so on opposite, ends of the spectrum on what the real truth is. Are you finding that, notwithstanding that, you're able to bring people together and tackle some of those challenging topics?
Yes, I would say yes. And now again, I don't know what'll happen when we get into all the parts of the population, if that ever happened. But yes, I mean, very often people who come in with strongly stereotyped views of the issue and of the opposition leave with a feeling of, oh, there's actually a lot more we could do than we thought. And I believe very strongly that the most powerful thing is to actually start doing stuff together. So if you can reach some agreement on a curriculum, for example, for schools, or on a way that parents can be better represented in the development of curriculum. If you can reach agreement on that would not just compromise, but where both sides think, oh yeah, this is a good idea, let's do that. But that really helps. Then people start saying, okay, well, maybe there's more. Then they start developing relationships. They start developing understanding, and things can progress. If they're fighting, you don't get anywhere. I mean, or you get blowback, or you get, the kind of dug-in hostility that is freezing up our politics at all levels.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. Antonin has a question. You have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Antonin? Antonin? Unmute yourself. Okay, now say it
Vicky-
again. Say everything again.
Everything. I didn't even begin, but I also thank you for mentioning unmuting. That's essential to my participation in our discussion here. I first would like to thank Charles for his presentation and for laying the ground for a very interesting discussion. I remember some of the discussion, especially once at your kitchen table in Princeton, and now I understand better and more about Braver, or at that time I think it was still called the Better Angels. But despite this very interesting information I got here, it also confirmed one of my basic skepticism about Braver or Better Angels. The problem, in my opinion, seems to be the following. We have two separate spheres in society, albeit they overlap, but they're two separate spheres. One sphere is the social sphere and the other sphere is the political sphere. And the social sphere, in my opinion, is about inclusion, but the political sphere is not in the first instance about inclusion, it's about representation. And in my opinion, the basic flaw of American democracy is the gerrymandering, which completely has destroyed inclusion at every level of the American political system, the democratic system. Representativity is important because democracy is not only majority rule, it's also representation of the people on different levels of government, state, federal government, local government. And in a society where all powers of the state, the legislative power, the executive power, the judicial power are gerrymandering, it's very difficult to come to conclusions and to solve problems. And I also would say that the two-party system lends itself to gerrymandering. It's much more difficult to gerrymander in Switzerland with a multi-party system, because there are always coalitions possible. And actually also the idea that for elections there are special districts that do not overlap, at least on the local level, with local communities. In a federalist system where the local level is an important political unity, that's also a basic problem. So inclusion may help sometimes in politics, but as long as we don't solve the problem of representativity and address the problem of representativity in government, it is difficult to find a solution.
I'd agree with that, but the question is, how do we get there? Really, because we're, people have been talking, and right now we're into this vicious circle of mistrust that I talked about earlier, which is, whoever you think started it. Right now we're in a situation where when the Democrats get in, they gerrymander for Democrats. When the Republicans get in, they gerrymander for Republicans, and each side says, you see what they did, we got to do it too, because otherwise we'll lose, right? I mean, so it just, there's just sort of no way out of it. It's a real one of those very bad dynamics. And I don't know how to get there, except for the fact that if the if the Republican districts were not so polarized from the Democratic ones, then it wouldn't be such an issue. I mean, that's really essentially what I would say. So we, I actually think a bigger problem is the primary system, because what we have in the US is that the candidates are selected by a very small subset of the voters in the primaries. And those people who are the really energetic ones, are the most ideologically polarized. So you get these, the Tea Party on the right, and you get some of the most, entrenched progressives on the left. And whatever you think of them, they're driving the parties apart. And I don't see, that fortunately, in a sense, primaries are probably the easiest thing to fix in principle if anybody wanted to do it. There's nothing in the Constitution about them. There's nothing that's deeply embedded in our system about the primary systems. The parties could change them. I think we just got to somehow, and this is, unwind this feeling that we've got to overcome them, so we've got to do what they did, only more so. That is what's driving our politics at all levels. I don't think we can, gerrymandering is a bad thing, but attacking gerrymandering, it seems to me, doesn't get you anywhere, because no one's going to buy it, right? That's not going to, it has to be a more indirect approach, and it really has to be about changing the political culture and changing the political conversation, which is what I'm working on.
Okay, now we have Evelyn. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm at it. Hi. Yeah, I just think that this is actually, of course, gerrymandering is not good. There's a lot of things in our system that has to be changed. It should have been changed decades ago, and there's all kinds of flaws. But we need dialogue to develop ideas, to explore what are people thinking about, what are their needs. What is this really about, and to move towards a constructive solution. And if you read books about, our decline into fascism, which I really think we're trending towards, that is sort of an us and them, and vilifying certain groups and vilifying the other side. And as Charles pointed out, that you can't have a dialogue if the other person is an enemy, or the other party is an enemy, and they're all idiots. Well, you don't talk to idiots. You don't talk to to the demons every day. And if you demonize people, and you really start to understand they also have needs, and they're also, you see them not as other, you see them as also human. Right? And you connect. This is the thing that the empathy circle stresses a lot, is connection first, and then we can have dialogue, and then we might find a solution, right? But as long as you don't see that humanness, and that's what this is all, is it's like, de-intensifying, just getting things to a point where we can see each other again. When you're on Facebook, I do a lot of work for DA on Facebook, and reaching out to voters and finding them, because overseas voters are not easy to find. Very few overseas voters vote no. And you get into these discussions, and it's like, I usually leave, because it's like, oh, they're idiots, and this is a caricature. And if you could go back to the rise of the Third Reich, and there's a process. I think Tim Snyder is very good at describing how that happens. You start vilifying, and you start, and everything, and this is not true. People do bad things, but they're people, right? We do bad things. Everybody does things that are not right. So this is the level where Better Angels and all these other organizations are trying to, reach across the table. And actually, good politics, even our politics, when people say bipartisan, we need a bipartisan solution. That's actually the ideal, is that we can talk to each other and bring a constructive solution forward, right? And then gerrymandering is a winner take all, and our two-party system is too much winner take all, and this is, I think, American society has become very individualistic, and we've got to sort of come back to connection. There's it's not true. Maggie Thatcher said there is no such thing as society, so let's get rid of unions and get rid of all this stuff. yeah, no, there's the individual and there's society, and we've got to sort of marry them in a better, healthy way somehow, right? And on the very, very micro level, that's dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and learning to deal with conflict and learning to deal with difficult things in a constructive way, not just taking out your gun and shooting 60 people, hitting them on the head, insulting them. That's where we're at sometimes, you know, it's just shocking, right? But and we've got to get away from that, and we've got to just change our media landscape. That doesn't help either, right?
Yeah.
But
No,
yeah.
I mean, I just think that the sort of the town hall thing is something we can actually do, right? Can't stop gerrymandering, but I think it may potentially create the conditions that would lead to a change of the attitude that leads to gerrymandering. That's the only way I see to do it. Got to think of things that we can actually do. It's easy. It's not easy, but every article I read among Democrats or anybody else for that matter, but I'm just thinking about the Democrats now is, here's a big problem, we should fix it. Okay, that doesn't really help you. Right? we should stop. Inequality is very bad. We should redistribute money, right? But that's not going to help you because you can't do it, right? What can you do that actually is going to make some progress? And for me, I mean, I think there are many things you can do, but for me, this is a thing that I can do that I think goes in the right direction. And then that meets my value. I actually have a question. I mean, I would really like to follow up on what Sharon asked, as I've been thinking about it a little bit, because I think you and to some extent, I think is your name Lee Donnell? Is that yeah? Is that right? Have I got that more or less? We're raising the hard question, which is, can we really get it out of this elite bubble? And so I really would like to hear your thoughts on whether that's possible.
I was just actually typing into the chat box regarding the question, what we can do. Well, what we definitely could do is start teaching our children the basic skill set of communication again, about listening to each other, hearing each other out, but also communicating so that other people understand what I'm trying to communicate to them. And when we look at the US, that has been long gone since many, many years already, and it's got really, really intense, where people just are so hardened by their own opinions that they don't even overcome themselves to just simply listen and acknowledge what actually the facts are given at hand. And interestingly, though, this phenomena is popping up all over the world. So this is a global issue. So yeah. And your question was again, Charles? Sorry.
It follows on that, but how do we reach beyond what's now essentially an elite movement? Pretty much white, but certainly elite. Highly educated folks.
Well, what we have been doing is we have been reaching out to many, many various grassroots organizations, not just domestically, but also abroad, and talking to organizations that are specified on the topics of African American people or people of color. For example, one great awareness that was uncovered actually is that we have all these different BLM movements, Black Lives Matters committees throughout the world. And we've been speaking to the Asia Pacific region. And for example, Tokyo has a membership base of 20,000 people in it. And of course, not all of them are African American, but the majority of them are. And so they did a survey on their African American people in their membership, asking, do you vote? And do you know how to vote? And shockingly, most of them people either don't vote or they don't know how to vote, and they don't even have access to vote. So we came up with a solution to organizing an event for BLM with their membership together so that they can get the information they need for getting out the vote and getting access to their ballots, and also not being afraid to cast their vote, because a lot of them, what also turned out in the survey was, well, the tax issue was a problem and so on and so forth. So I think if you target specifically organizations, grassroots organizations, that is the way to go, because the numbers are there.
No, I agree with that in general, and I'm really fascinated to hear about your particular experience. I think that may, we should learn from that. I think it's, the organizations exist in the communities and so on. We just got to find a way to connect to them, and maybe we're getting there because we have some people who have some connections now, and then maybe that will spread.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Charles, what I think about, like, for our organization, we're not a large group, but we do believe in bringing in diverse groups of people to talk about and address issues such as race, such as critical race theory, things of that nature. And it's about trying to, in some respects, find middle ground, but also bring in documentaries or other information where people come together, see the, and whatever the topic is of discussion in a documentary, if you will. And it's important to us to have a safe space for people to talk and have, ground rules that you're not going to attack each other, and be a safe space to be open and candid. And I know that when I'm hearing you, I think that the idea of bringing people together is a good one. When you're dealing with educated, predominantly white members, I'm hopeful that there is a receptiveness to hear people who may not fit that demographic, and to not have a dynamic such that they're looking to meaningfully engage feel dismissed on some level. And if there is meaningful engagement, I like that idea. What I'm hoping would not happen is that in order to get consensus around topics, that really important salient issues, particularly for people of color, are not really being dealt with in order to drive consensus, that you're staying on safe topics that don't really address real key issues for people of color who are looking for a dialogue on such issues as like voting rights, for example, that your ability to exercise that right at the state legislative area. You're seeing a lot of laws being changed, but they're changed based on a premise that there's rampant voter fraud, which, depending upon which news cycles you listen to, you get differing views, and people are feeling legitimate in their stance on these positions. But I'd like to see I commend what you're doing, and so, because I don't really know how substantive and meaty the issues are, is there a way to even provide educational materials that are safe and embedded, if you will, that are not slanted one way or the other, that could even drive a dialogue among people on just a basic common understanding around what the true facts are, to try to work through and drive meaningful change.
Yeah, and I agree with really everything you said there. I think it's a very difficult task. It's not like we haven't. We do have, a fair smattering of diversity in all our events. I do remember that one of the most controversial discussions we had in the town halls was around police reform. It was in Portland. It was, last summer. When was it last summer? Or I lose track. The one where things were really blowing up. And so it was pretty heated, but the closest that it came to blowing up was a disagreement between an African American and a Latino participant who had very different views on what the nature of the problem was. So we do have those kinds of people. We do have a fair diversity. We have some diversity. I don't think we've fully stress tested it yet. We've also dealt with some controversial issues, so we have, we've tested it some ways. But whether, if we had in Georgia a discussion of voting rights at this point, we could come up with stuff that was constructive, I'd like to try it. I can't be sure.
Now, I think that something like that would be meaningful, and if through use of of Zoom technology and everything, and depending upon the audience brought to the conversation.
Yeah.
Doing something that is substantively and educationally impactful to have us all hear each other, it really matters. And in our organization, we think it's critical to have Blacks and whites and a diverse people talking about topics to try to bridge that education. And we want people who are not like-minded so that we can hear each other. And we recently did a 50 library consortium around the Chicago metropolitan area and had Richard Rothstein speak and on, dealing with segregation and redlining and everything. We had over 1,300 people participate. And so we're trying to do things that are educational, even though we're smaller, and we can reach a lot of people by doing such strategies. And to echo Lee's messaging to you, if there's ways for us to collaborate in our respective areas to drive meaningful education and change and hearing of each other, that's critical.
Great. No, and I would love to, any help you can give us with connections and processes and so on, I'd love to have.
So one of the things that's happening right now is some networking, which is also something I very much appreciate, and I'm glad for such an important group of people that we've brought together. I wanted to just comment as the person who's trying to be the facilitator here, that I decided not to go into breakout rooms because I feel that maybe we can have a conversation or continue this conversation, both with questions, but also with the resources that are also on this screen with us together. I was very struck by hearing from people like Evelyn, meeting you for the first time and hearing very like-minded approaches that you bring, and Sharon and Jazz, whom I know and whose work I value very much as well. I wanted to say, I wanted to come back to your first statement, Charles, that diversity reduces trust. I deliberately outed myself as somebody who has, at the moment, a limited tolerance for wanting to engage in dialogue with certain people because of my own sense of polarization and my own sense of just being despairing and furious, perhaps. And I deliberately brought myself into that conversation as an example, because I suspect that people who appear or who maybe come to some of the sessions that you've talked about, that they come with that kind of intransigence as well. They want to be able to engage in dialogue, but they're too pissed off, they're too disappointed, they're too othered themselves, or they're feeling too excluded to be able to do that. And I wondered if we could have a conversation about how our own experience of being perhaps not only very high-minded about wanting to engage in dialogue, but how do we get there? Or maybe you could give us some examples, or you, Evelyn, or Sharon, some examples of how you've experienced overcoming this kind of intransigence that I feel very strongly in myself. At the same time that I started to think about the people that don't want to get vaccinated, or the people who say who demonstrate with torches and say Jews will not replace us. I think they care very deeply. I think even the people who broke into the Capitol on January 6th care very deeply about something that I find impossible, that I find reprehensible even. And how do we get to dialogue when we're so polarized? So I hear the idea of finding common ground and putting the difficult issues aside at town hall meetings, which is what I heard you say, Charles. But at some point, the difficult stuff needs to be addressed. And I just wanted to put this out there. This is not just to you, Charles, but to everybody on the screen. What ideas, what thoughts, what experiences might be shared right now. And I encourage people who haven't yet spoken also to engage in this conversation. And
So
you can all unmute yourselves and
just jump in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just say that when it's not exactly putting difficult issues aside. First of all, these are difficult issues, but I do believe that by starting with common ground, you then progress. You make that's that's the idea. It's not just avoiding.
thanks for clarifying that. That wasn't so clear to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Go ahead, Evelyn.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jazz. This time you first.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you. What I always tell people and encourage people to do is also to talk to complete strangers. And even if it's very visible from the outside that there might not be many common ground talking points. So an example, just a few months back in Germany, I was at a bus stop and there was this quite young person who was clearly more aligning to the right political movement. And we just stood there and then he looked at me and I looked at him and then I just said, hi, and how are you doing? And we just started a conversation, and this conversation was then at one point I didn't ask him, I was like, well, so by the way that you're dressed, you're signalizing that you do believe in a particular political value, but I didn't say it in a way that I'm putting him down. I just wanted to open the floor and want to know why he feels that way and what knowledge he can give me, because I always think that hearing others out is quite valuable. And so we talked about that, and then he also talked about me and my political views and this and that, and it was a very, very peaceful conversation. And it was about a half an hour, 45 minutes. Our buses constantly passed by. And when we were done, this person said, you know what? I still like what I'm wearing and I still like the symbolism of it, but I do get what you're telling me. So his takeaway from that talk was, because he was also blaming a lot of negative things on all of the refugees, the refugees that come to Germany, because he was just looking at one side of the media. And when I asked him about the person who is actually responsible for the vaccine in Germany or for one of the labs, if he knew who that was, and he was like, no. And then I told him who that was. It's an Afghan refugee, actually. And he was quite shocked. I was like, see, you just have to open your spectrum and read more than one particular news outlet. So it was a very good conversation. That's awesome. And every time when I do events, I tell people to take the information home with them. And if they see somebody at the park bench, just say hi and just start conversation. It could go in any direction.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are my 5 cents.
Mhm.
Evelyn?
For me, it's kind of a personal journey, learning the stop button, reflecting, but I've also been, as I mentioned, the empathy circles already, and that's a structured listening practice, and learning to listen to stuff that maybe you don't want to listen to, but you're in a group with 4 people and you're sort of, each person has their chance to be listened to. And then realizing somehow in this energy that it's more important to connect than to agree or disagree in the first moment. This doesn't guarantee that everything's going to be lovey-dovey afterwards, or, this is only like a first step. But that was a big learning process for me. And I go through cycles where I think, oh no, this is, and I mean, I can feel it this Christmas that a lot of people are stressed out and dejected by the whole political scene and everything that's happening around the world and in the States. And, so I go through that more personal journey where I say, okay, sometimes I need to step back. I certainly have to learn in conflicts to not react right away, to reflect, and also to deal with my own projections, where I start thinking, oh, that person is stupid, or this is stupid. And it is sometimes. I've listened to interviews with braver angels, and I didn't like some of them because some of the arguments that the other side, my other side was saying were factually ridiculous. I mean, it's like this is, you can't, it's impossible, right? And this remains a big question for me as somebody who's highly educated. My first degree is in economics, and that is still a problem. If I hear things that I think, well, this is like, I don't know, the earth is flat or the sun goes up in the afternoon, not in the morning. This kind of that is still a big problem for me. So I'm struggling with that. And I really, I try to process these things and try to approach people a little bit differently. And I can feel that changing. There's no great big solution, but that's kind of the journey I've started on.
And what you're saying, the empathy circles that you describe, are they something? It's a new concept for me. It's related to things that I do, but I haven't heard about empathy.
Yeah. Well,
is it something? Can you say a little bit more about it?
Yes. Well, this is somebody who. Edwin Rutch, I think, is the person who founded this, and this has been around for a while. It's sort of an offshoot of the nonviolent communication theories and culture, and it comes out of that group. And they basically say that nonviolent communication is intellectually on the right path, but they're missing empathy. And so there are trainings and regular, there are also clips on YouTube, for example. It's basically a group of 4 people. It's a structured listening practice where you sort of change the roles. There's 2 main roles, as an active speaker and an active listener. And the other 2 people are basically witnesses who hold the space. The active speaker speaks. The active listener has to mirror, right? And then the roles are changed. And by holding this space, it just creates a space. It's almost like spiritual, where you say things happen in the gap, right? And it's very interesting because you get your chance to observe. And that's what I keep stressing, is that I learned that people connect even though they disagree with each other. People connect even though the other person is not listening to them. I mean, it's kind of crazy. But somehow they connect, and the idea is that by connecting in this first space and by learning to listen, then they can, in a conflict or whatever, they can go on to the next step, right? And I've just joined. They have a brand new book club next year. We're reading Tim Snyder's On Tyranny and doing empathy circles, active listening, 10 weeks. I signed up and I'm going to be a facilitator.
Great.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for introducing it. To at least to me, maybe to all of us. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I've talked
Sharon,
to Jazz a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sharon also has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about, I think as a woman of color, what I have found is you go into different environments, and sometimes you walk into rooms and people have preconceived notions about who you are just based on the visuals without taking the time to get to know you. I have embraced interact with people from a broad range of political beliefs, cultures, etc., because I am of the view that we all, if we take the time to get to know each other on a human level, have so much in common. And yes, when I found that some of my dear friends were maybe on the other side of a spectrum from me politically, like Evelyn, you're alluding to, like the earth may be flat and the sun comes up in the afternoon. I had
founding director of the
Oh, sorry.
I had to pause and determine, how did I feel about that? But because these are people that I've cared about before this even became an issue, it taught me that I've got to learn how to compartmentalize that aspect, but still engage in a way so that we can still find middle ground, if you will, and have the conversations, because the relationship is already there. And so it's a matter of how do I now get a better sense of why their perspective has evolved in the way that it has, in hopes of still, building bridges, whether it's with them or other people for that matter. And I've seen a situation, for example, that two gentlemen traveled with a group out of the Chicago area to Montgomery, Alabama. And they spent a lot of time looking at the museum and some of the controversial information there. And they have become the best of friends because they've used that opportunity to really engage and understand each other's perspectives. And now they sometimes share how they connected, but it's about, I think, spending time with each other, even if you aren't necessarily on the same page, but be willing to find that middle ground and hopefully have some progress being made too on moving the meter in a way that results in us getting something achieved that matters for both of our sakes. And particularly in this realm, we've got a lot going on that is concerning politically in our country that we all care about.
Thank you, Sharon. I wanted to mention, Antony and I were part of a group of 6 friends that went to Montgomery, Alabama 2.5 years ago. And it was really one of the most powerful experiences that I've made in terms of my own education, but it was very emotional, very powerful. And it's something that I would really highly recommend for even people who want to do something, but don't really know what to do, to educate themselves. It's a place of pilgrimage, as far as I'm concerned, in the United States. And I highly recommend groups in America, if they can, or coming from Europe, to go to see the Legacy Museum, to see the lynching memorial, and to experience both of them. There is a lot of other information in Montgomery that's available as well, because of the Rosa Parks Museum there, the Freedom Riders Museum, the information about the bus boycott. There's a lot to learn there, and it's a good place to visit. So I just want to make a plug for it. I'm a very big supporter now of the Equal Justice Initiative, but I think it's a place of pilgrimage that should be visited. And I'm glad you mentioned it, Sharon. I appreciate the suggestion also.
Thank you.
Who else would like to contribute something to this conversation, or to the idea of how can we overcome our own stereotyping, our own prejudices, our own resistance to engaging in dialogue?
Charles has his hand up.
Hi, Charles.
I do.
Thank you, Sharon. I didn't see it.
So if that's the question, I mean, I'm sort of with. I still haven't quite got your name, Lee or Jazz or something. Is that right? Something like that.
Both.
I'm with that. You start talking to strangers, but I think that can be done in a more systematic way as well. Just to try to engage to some extent with people who you don't normally engage with. I mean, that's just the sort of core thing. I certainly find it hard. I mean, like I have tried reading, the right-wing press. It depresses me quite quickly, but I mean, it's just emotionally hard to do. But I do read a thing regularly called The Flip Side, which I recommend. So if you look up The Flip Side on Google, is the first thing that comes up, which is just a daily letter that comes on an issue and says how it's being presented on basically on the different ends of the spectrum. And some of them surprising ones, you find that there's actually quite a lot of agreement, but on many, of course, there's great disagreement. But it's enough sort of buffered and protected that it's not too emotionally hard, but you really learn some stuff about how it's being framed differently. That's I think it's so hard to hear something that's really different from what you believe. but also so important. And how to make that engagement is really, is really the question. Something simple like that I find really good. I also just wanted to say a couple of things, in response, or a thing in response to this, what Vicky said earlier about avoiding the difficult issues and so on. There's a couple of important philosophical things behind here, and one is not to avoid the difficult issues, to engage the difficult issues, but not to try to convince others that you're right. That's not the point, right? So you recognize, so it's very important. So when we start with the town halls, we've done some preliminary surveys of the participants. We put up there, people are really disagreeing on these things. We recognize people are saying, so that's, we're not denying that. We're not claiming that this is kumbaya, we're all agreeing. But what can we do together? That's the question for this discussion. So common ground is not really conceived of as compromise, right? Common ground is something that both sides think are good, is good, for whatever reasons. So we're not saying, oh, well, it's not very good, but it's a little better than that. It's actually something I think is good. And you actually find a remarkable amount of that in most of these issues, including police reform, including critical race theory, and so on, conversations that I've had.
Thank you. I also was thinking that one of the things that I like about Democrats abroad is that we do all tend to think similarly. It gives me a feeling of validation. It gives me a feeling of community, gives me a feeling of comfort. And right now in this very polarized atmosphere, it's a safe place to, or a go-to place, I think, for many of us, and to take us out of that is very challenging. It's the motivation, I think, is what I'm addressing. I know it's important, and I think you were very convincing, Charles, about how urgent it is to have these conversations and to find common ground with people we haven't met before or didn't think we would ever want to be in the same room with. So that's my reaction for the, it's a lot of food for thought. Anybody else want to say anything right now? We don't have to continue this conversation indefinitely.
What about Ellen and Mona? Don't you want to say something? Hi, Ellen. Hi, Mona. Would you like to say something?
No, I'm just, the listening is very interesting.
Okay.
So I'll stick with what you
said. Are you in Switzerland?
I'm in Zurich.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mona?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't know that much about Democrats abroad, but I was very interested in all the conversations. And yeah, I mean, I would like to participate more if I have more time. I will see, but I liked to hear about the Democrats abroad and this organization. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are you a member already, or?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. I think so.
Mona's my very dear friend, my very dear friend. So we will continue the conversation.
Okay. All right. I'd like to plug for Jazz, put it in the chat already. The Global Black Caucus, I'm also a volunteer for the Global Black Caucus, is screening a film called The Reunited States on January 6th. And I think it's a good follow-up to this because it's complicated kind of story, but one of the storylines is a couple that goes across the United States and talks to very different people. And they're Republicans, basically, evangelicals, if I understood it correctly. And it's very, very interesting to see how they dialogue. And at the end, there's this conclusion. We have to listen to people. We have to open our hearts, listen from the heart, which is what I was saying about connecting. And it's just quite a fascinating film, which I don't know how Jazz came up with it, but you're all welcome to come to join us on January 6th. I don't know what time is it, Jazz? I'm not sure. Do you
The event is not on the website yet, and
No.
the time as well not, but it might be a bit later in the evening around 8:30 because there's now another global event that has been pushed in, so we're being pushed back a bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it'll probably be around 8:30 Central European time.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that information. It sounds very interesting.
It is.
I would like to kind of put some closure on this conversation because I think it's so rich, but it's, for some of us, it's later in the evening, Charles. For you, it's the middle of the day, and for Sharon. But I would like to thank you, Charles, for triggering what I think was a very thoughtful and very important conversation. And I think it's an ongoing conversation that we will certainly have, but with certain aspects that I think have become clearer. And I would like to use the last sentence in your slides to give us maybe the motivation to think about for the future. You said, can we build enthusiasm for full inclusion rather than winning? And of course we want to win, but how do we do it? How do we make full inclusion the path that may help us to get to where we truly win? Because we know that what doesn't work will destroy us all. And I think it's an important question, and one that maybe we can all take with us and see what we do with it. And we as an organization, or in the various subdivisions of our organization, because we're organized also around chapters, and we have a Zurich chapter, a Basel chapter, a Geneva chapter, but we also have a national organization which we're sitting together with, and we have global organizations as well. And so we have a 24-hour timetable sometimes, as Jazz was indicating. We have to somehow figure out when we can hold events so that if we want to meet people globally, we can do that. So I want to say thank you to everybody who participated in this conversation, or who participated in the spirit of what we were trying to do. And I want to thank Liz for her getting us together, and thank everybody who's spoken and who's been here. Charles, I hope, I don't know if you want to say something about what it was for you to be introduced to Democrats Abroad in this way.
Well, nothing very profound. No, I want to thank you. I mean, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I'm delighted that you invited.
Good. Me too. I'm delighted too. So it's a win-win. And thank you very much, everybody. And I wish you a good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. And let's stay connected. The connection is very important.
I will also just plug real quick, if you enjoyed this salon, or if you have attended any of our other salons and you have an idea for a future salon topic, either that you would like to see or possibly that you would like to lead, please get in touch with someone in DA Switzerland's leadership, either Eric at chair@democratsabroad.ch or myself at vice-chair@democratsabroad.ch. So thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Happy holidays to all.
Happy holidays and Happy New Year, right? And
Yes.
see you on
Exactly.
January 6th, right?
Good night. Thanks all.
Good night.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye. Bye-bye.